This is Cambridge IGCSE Chemistry Paper 2 multiple choice extended for February-March 2025. Right, 0620, code paper 2, variant 2. Okay, question number 1. The diagram shows containers of gas at the same temperature. All containers have the same size. Which container contains gas at the highest pressure? So since all of them have the same size and they are of the same temperature, the one that has the highest pressure will be the one that has the most gas particles within the same volume because they will collide with the wall more frequently, applying more pressure. Right? There's a proportional relationship between the number of gas particles as well as pressure. So the answer is A because we have the most particles in a given volume. Question 2. A cooling curve for a substance is shown. Which statement is correct? Now, between U and V, the substance is not condensing because this is not the condensation point. That's just cooling down a gas maybe. Between V and W, heat is not being absorbed. Instead, it is released to the surrounding because V to W is the condensation point. Right? Condensation point. It's where gases condense to liquid. The answer here is actually, well, C. Because W and X is where you can find liquid state of the matter. And in liquid state, particles are close together and are randomly arranged. So for D, the mistake is Y to Z, the substance is actually staying as a solid, right? Because that's beyond the freezing point. Question 3. Samples of 4 gases are released in a room at the same time. The gases are carbon dioxide, hydrogen chloride, hydrogen sulfide, and nitrogen dioxide. Which gas diffuses fastest? So the concept is the gas that has the lowest relative mass will be the gas that diffuses the fastest. So we have to find out the relative mass of the particles using the periodic table. So for carbon dioxide, it is 12 plus 16 times 2, which equates to 44. Hydrogen chloride will be 1 plus 35.5, which equates to 36.5. Hydrogen sulfide will be 2 times 1 plus 32, becomes 34. And nitrogen dioxide will be, let me check the periodic table. 14 plus 16 times 2. That equates to 46. So out of the gases, it will be our hydrogen sulfide that is the lightest out of all the molecules. Right? Out of all, hydrogen sulfide has the least MR. So the answer for this question is C for cat. Question 4. Sulfur atoms can form the negative ions, S2 minus. 3 other atoms or ions are listed. How many of these atoms or ions have the same electronic configuration as sulfide ion? So sulfide ion is made from sulfur atoms. Sulfur atoms had the electron arrangement of 286, which you can get the data from the periodic table. And to form a negative ion, sulfur gains 2 electrons to form sulfide ions. So the electron arrangement is now from 286 and becomes 288. So we have to find out the electron arrangement of the following particles. Argon is, based on the periodic table, argon is 288, calcium is 282, and oxide, which originates from oxygen, which has an electron arrangement of 26, will be having a 2-8 arrangement. So out of the 3 particles here, only one of them has the same electron arrangement, electronic configuration as our sulfide ion here. Question 5. Element T has 2 isotopes, T12 and T14. Which statement about these isotopes are correct? So isotopes actually have the same chemical properties because they have the same number of outer shell electrons. Right? So if you know what is element number 6 in the periodic table, that's our carbon, right? It's carbon 12 and carbon 14. The reason why carbon likes to form covalent bonds, for example, forms 4 single covalent bonds with, let's say, for example, with hydrogen atoms to form methane, or carbon forming 2 double bonds with 2 oxygen atoms, is because of its electron arrangement, which is 2, 4, right? It has 4 outer shell electrons, and to gain a full outer shell, it exhibits these chemical behaviors. So the answer is B for boy. They have different nucleon numbers because the sum of the protons and neutrons are different. And they have the same position in the periodic table because they have the same number of protons. So statements C and D are incorrect. The answer is B for boy. Let's go to number 6. Lithium is in group 1 of the periodic table. Nitrogen is in group 5 of the periodic table. Lithium reacts with nitrogen to form the ionic compound lithium nitride. What happens to the electrons when lithium atom and nitrogen atom forms ions? So here's the thing. For lithium, the electron arrangement is 2, 1. For nitrogen, it is 2, 5. Right? This is you can get this from the periodic table. Basically, look at the proton number and deduce the electrons and deduce the electron arrangement. So to get a full outer shell, lithium will form lithium ion, which has an electron arrangement of 2, and nitrogen will become, well, 2s, which is nitride ion. So lithium will actually lose 1 electron instead of gaining 1 electron to become an Li plus ion, and nitrogen will gain 3 electrons to form an N3 minus ion. So the answer for number 6 is A. Question 7. For which covalent compound does the dot and cross diagram correctly shows the outer shell electrons? Now, hydrogen is a element that has 1 outer shell electron. It will share 1 of its electron with another atom to get a full outer shell. So A is wrong because it wouldn't have any lone pair of electrons. Same goes with B, right? Then for our nitrogen atom here, it is a group 5 element. It has 5 outer shell electrons, and it will share with other elements, like for example, hydrogen, which is, you will get C as the answer. It will contribute 3 of its electron for sharing, and in return, hydrogen will share 1 of its electron for sharing. That allows it to get a full outer shell. For D, it is wrong because simply the lone pair of electron is missing. Number 8. Which row identifies the positive and the negative particles present in a giant metallic lattice? So in a giant metallic lattice, it is composed of metal cations surrounded by a sea of delocalized electrodes. So the answer here is D for donkey. Let's go to number 9. Which formula of the name compound is correct? Calcium oxide is Ca2 plus and O2 minus. When they combine together, they form a particle in a 1:1 ratio, so CaO. Others are incorrect because cobalt 2 and chloride should form a 1:2 ratio, CoCl2. Sulfur dioxide should be SO2 after you simplify the simplest whole number ratio. And anhydrous copper 2 sulfate should be Cu2 plus and SO4 2 minus. When they combine together, they should react in a 1:1 ratio. So CuSO4. Question 10. The equation for the reaction of magnesium and dilute sulfuric is shown below. Which mass of magnesium sulfate is formed when 12 grams of magnesium completely reacts with dilute sulfuric acid? So, since we are given the mass of magnesium and they want us to find the mass of magnesium sulfate, so we have to first convert the amount of magnesium used into moles, and then we compare the mole ratio which is given by the equation, and lastly we should use that to find the mass of magnesium sulfate. So step 1, to find moles of magnesium, we have to take the mass of the magnesium divided by the molar mass of magnesium, which can be gotten from the periodic table. and it's 24 grams per mole. That will leave you with 0.5 moles of magnesium. Using that, we can actually compare the mole ratio based on the equation. They react in a 1:1 ratio. So similarly, 0.5 moles of magnesium should form 0.5 moles of magnesium sulfate. Using this answer, we can take 0.5 moles of magnesium sulfate and multiply by the molar mass of magnesium sulfate, which is given to us 120 grams per mole. That gives us 60 grams of magnesium sulfate. Question 11. An organic compound Q contains carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen only. It's given that this particle has 40% carbon and 6.7% hydrogen by mass. What is the empirical formula of Q? Now, these three elements, their total percentage by mass should equate to 100%. That means if we have 40% carbon, we should get what we call, and also 6.7% of hydrogen. That means the remainder will be oxygen. So we take 100% and minus 40 and 6.7. That should give us roughly a 53.3% of oxygen. Now, using the data here, we can actually find the mass ratio, right? Since this is percentage by mass, it's actually related to the mass ratio of these particles. And the second step to find empirical formula is to convert this to mole ratio, which we should just divide them by their molar mass. So using the periodic table, the molar mass of carbon is 12. The molar mass of hydrogen is 1. The molar mass of our oxygen is 60. So using this answer, we should get 3.33 is to 6.7 is to 3.33 ratio. Now, our final step is to convert this to the simplest whole number ratio, which a simple trick to do this is to divide by the smallest number out of the three numbers. So there will be 3.33. And after division, we get 1:2:1 ratio. So our empirical formula is CH2O. CH2O. So the answer is B for boy. Now, question 12. The value of the Avogadro's constant is 6.02 times 10 to the power 23. What is the total number of atoms in 12 moles of ammonia gas? Now, 12 moles of ammonia gas actually contains 8 moles of atoms because each molecule of ammonia has 4 atoms. That means 2 mole of ammonia should have 8 mole of atoms. Using this, we take the mole and multiply by the Avogadro's constant, as Avogadro's constant represents how many particles are there in 1 mole of a substance. So mole is basically this number, and by multiplication, we can just find the answer straight away. You should get 4.82 times 10 to the power 24 atoms. So C is the answer. Next, 3 aqueous solutions L, M, and N are electrolyzed using inert electrodes. Which solutions produce a pale yellow-green gas at the anode? Now, for the first question, right, or should I say for all 3 questions, we have to analyze the ions present for these 3 electrolytes. For the first solution, it contains hydrogen ion from the hydrochloric acid and also from the solution, as well as hydroxide ions and chloride ions. So based on the ease of discharge series, we should get hydrogen at the cathode and concentrated chloride solution is present here. So it will be chloride that gets discharged, which forms our chlorine gas at the anode. For the second question, concentrated sodium chloride contains 4 ions, one coming from the solute, sodium chloride, the other one coming from the solution, aqueous. So there will be hydrogen ions and hydroxide ions present. Using the ease of discharge series, we should get hydrogen at the cathode. And then our chloride will be preferentially discharged because it's concentrated. So we get chlorine gas also at the anode. For the last question, it's dilute sodium chloride solution as well. We have the same 4 ions. However, the difference here is that it is dilute. When it's dilute, the priority is different. Instead of chloride, it will be hydroxide that gets preferentially discharged. So when hydroxide is preferentially discharged, we will get oxygen instead of chlorine. So the answer here will be L and M, because this chlorine gas is pale yellow-green. So A is the answer. Let's go to question 40. Dilute sulfuric acid is electrolyzed using inert electrodes. What are the ionic half equations for the reactions that take place at each electrode? So first, let's establish the ions present. There will be hydrogen ions, and sulfuric acid contains sulfate ions. Furthermore, it is an acid solution, so there will be hydroxide ions also. According to the ease of discharge series, we should get our hydrogen ions getting discharged and our hydroxide getting discharged instead of sulfate. Now, the location where they are discharged is dependent on the charge of the electrode. The positive electrode, also known as the what they call anode, will attract negative ions instead of positive ions. And our negative electrode should attract positive ions instead of negative ions. So the right equation is C. When hydroxide ions are discharged, it should form water, oxygen, and 4 electrons instead of equation here at D. Let's go to question 15. Which statements about hydrogen-oxygen fuel cells are correct? Now, hydrogen-oxygen fuel cells involves the usage of hydrogen and oxygen, and that is converted to water. Now, from the equation here, right, if you look at the oxidation number, hydrogen gas being a molecule should have an oxidation number of 0. And in water, hydrogen will have an oxidation number of +1. And oxide has an oxidation number of -2. So here we can see that hydrogen is getting oxidized instead of reduced. And this chemical reaction actually generates electrical energy to run engines. So 1 is correct, and 3 is also correct, because the only product is water. Compared to your petrol engines, it doesn't form carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. So in a way, they do not produce any atmospheric pollutants like carbon dioxide or carbon monoxide. So the answer for 15 is C for cat. Let's go to 16. The reaction pathway diagram for the reaction between P and Q to form R and S is shown. Which letter represents the enthalpy change for the reaction? Enthalpy change refers to the energy difference between the reactants and the products. This is the reactant, this is the product. So C is the answer. Right, the energy difference here. B is actually the activation energy, which is measured from the reactant to the peak of the graph. And D, not emphasized in IG syllabus. So we're just going to focus on B and C. So C is your enthalpy change, also known as delta H. Now, 17. The equation for the complete combustion of methane is shown below. The table shows some bond energies. What is the enthalpy change for this reaction? To find enthalpy change, what we must do is find the bond breaking energy among the reactants, find the bond formation energy in the products, and also find the delta H by applying the formula, the bond breaking energy minus the bond formation energy. So first, these molecules have to be atomized. We have to break the bonds, right? So according to the bond energy here, it will cost us 4 sets of 410 to break down methane, and also 2 sets of 496 to break down 2 molecules of oxygen. So that will give us a value of 2632. Then bond formation, this molecule, carbon dioxide, will release 2 sets of 805 and 4 sets of 460, because there are 2 water molecules here, bringing it up to 2 sets of 2 OH bonds. That will give us a 3450 as the amount. So using the formula, 2632 minus 3450 will give us negative 818 kilojoule per mole. So the answer for question 17 is B for boy. Next, which change is a physical change? A physical change doesn't form any new chemicals, only state changes happen. So cracking an alkane should form new things like new chemicals like alkenes, hydrogen, or shorter alkanes. Fermenting glucose will give you carbon dioxide and ethanol, which are new chemicals. Neutralizing an acid in general forms you a salt and water, which are new chemicals. So the answer is B. Evaporating ethanol simply just change it to a gaseous state. Next, 19. Which statement explains why increasing the temperature in a reaction involving gases increases the rate of reaction? So increasing temperature actually helps us to increase the movement and kinetic energy of gas particles, which ultimately increases the collision frequency between gas particles. So the answer is 1 and 3. The substance that lowers activation energy is your catalyst instead of temperature. And the factor that increases the number of gas particles per unit volume is pressure or concentration instead of your temperature. So the answer is A. Question 20. The equation for the reaction between ammonia and oxygen gas is shown below. Which 2 changes to the reaction conditions will both move the position of equilibrium to the right? So since the forward reaction is an exothermic reaction, for the reaction to favor an exothermic reaction, or at least exothermic direction, we should actually lower the temperature so that it favors the exothermic reaction. And then we should decrease the pressure so that it will favor the side with more gas. You can see from the equation on the left, there are 9 particles in total by looking at the coefficients. And on the right-hand side, there are 10 molecules in total, right, by looking at the coefficients similarly. So for us to favor the side with more gas, we should decrease the pressure. And for us to favor the exothermic direction, we should decrease the temperature. So 20 is D for donkey. 21. Mercury 2 oxide decomposes when heated. The equation is shown below. Why is this a reduction reaction? Well, reduction reaction is simply defined, like there are many definitions for reduction. One of them is the loss of oxygen. We can see mercury here is losing oxygen. So that's reduction. All right, A and B are irrelevant. C is oxidation. 22. Some information about 2 dilute acids is shown below. 3 statements about the acids are listed. Which statements are correct? Now, One, nitric acid has a lower pH because it dissociates more than propanoic acid is actually correct. Because nitric acid is a strong acid. It dissociates completely to form high concentrations of protons, also known as hydrogen ions in water. So when there are more hydrogen ions, pH is lower. Whereas propanoic acid, it only dissociates partially in water, which means it only forms very little protons in water. So as a result, the pH is higher. So for statement 2, propanoic acid has a lower concentration of hydrogen ions, as mentioned earlier, that's correct. And as well as propanoic acid has a higher pH, not because it has a higher concentration. So the answer is 1 and 2. 23. Element E is a metal in group 1 of the periodic table, and element G is a non-metal in group 7. Both of these elements form oxides. Which statement about their oxides is correct? So since group 1 is a metal and group 7s are non-metals, when they form oxides, metal oxides in general are basic, whereas non-metal oxides in general are acidic. So the answer here is the oxide of G is acidic and the oxide of E is basic. The other answers are wrong. 24. Lead-2 sulfate is an insoluble salt. Which method is suitable for obtaining pure solid of lead-2 sulfate? Since lead-2 sulfate is an insoluble substance, so to create that, we need to do a precipitation reaction, which is by mixing two soluble solutions of lead-2 and sulfate to create our insoluble lead-2 sulfate here. So we cannot use D donkey because lead-2 hydroxide is insoluble instead of a solution. For A, it's also irrelevant because it's already a solid. We don't have to evaporate any water here. This is for soluble salt preparation. And B also, we don't have to do that, right? We don't have to collect the filtrate and crystallize it because it's already an insoluble substance. So the protocol is pretty simple. Just mix these two lead-2 solution and sulfate solution, which is in your sulfuric acid together. After that, you filter your residue, which is your lead-2 sulfate, and simply just wash and dry it. So C is the answer. Question 25. The elements oxygen and sulfur are in the same group of the periodic table. Which statement about oxygen and sulfur is not correct? A, they are non-metals, which is correct. B is incorrect. Your oxygen is a simple covalent structure. Actually, sulfur also are both simple covalent structures. They don't form giant covalent structures. Right? And C and D are correct because both of them are in group 6. So they have 6 valence electrons. And D is correct as well because sulfur dioxide is an acidic oxide which causes acid rain. Question 26. Tennessine is at the bottom of group 7 of the periodic table. What are the predicted properties of tennessine at room temperature? Now, group 7 elements are non-metals that exhibit color, where as you go down the group, color gets darker. And then density also increases. Reactivity decreases down group 7. So the answer here is A, where tennessine will be a black solid and is more dense than your iodine, which is above your tennessine atom here. 27. An example of sacrificial protection is the fitting of zinc blocks to the outside of a ship's steel hull. Which statement explains why zinc is used to protect the iron in a steel from rusting? So sacrificial protection works by having a more reactive element, right, which can help you to corrode instead of the less reactive element. So the answer is A here, as zinc is more reactive than iron. It will oxidize, or should I say corrode, in preference to iron, so that it protects iron from rusting. So 27 is A. 28. Which statement about alloys is correct? Now, alloys are harder than pure metals, not because they have strong intermolecular forces. These are for covalent molecules, not for metals or alloys, but because of the irregular size atoms that prevents the layers from sliding over each other whenever force is applied. Then brass is an alloy containing mainly your copper and basically not tin, right? Not tin, it's your zinc. And then the difference of atoms in the alloy mean that the layers cannot easily slide over each other, is what we have mentioned earlier. And there are actually alloys that contain carbon. It's your steel. Steel contains carbon and iron. So the answer here is C. 28, sorry, 29. Separate pieces of aluminium foil and copper foil are heated in air. The copper foil reacts to give a black solid. The aluminium foil doesn't react. Which statement explains these observations? So, although aluminium is above copper in the reactivity series, however, because aluminium has an unreactive oxide layer, this unreactive oxide layer is like a physical barrier that prevents the inner part of aluminium to react. So the answer is A. Aluminium does react with things, it's just that you have to remove the oxide layer first for it to react. So 29, the answer is A. 30. Which row gives the symbol equation for the formation of carbon monoxide and for the reduction of iron trioxide in the blast furnace? Now, this is a three-step process. First, we add coke into the blast furnace. It reacts with the hot air to form carbon dioxide. After that, this carbon dioxide will react with more coke to form carbon monoxide. So the equation should be, let's see here, it's your, not A or C, it should be B or D. Then this carbon monoxide acts as a reducing agent, which helps to reduce your iron 3 to pure iron. Right, so the answer is D for donkey. B is wrong because the formula here is wrong. This is iron 2 oxide, not iron 3 oxide. Question 31. A sample of river water contains a high concentration of nitrates from fertilizers. Which statements about the river water are correct? So since this is considered an impurity, we should expect to see the boiling point to be higher than 100. The melting point should be below 0 degrees Celsius. That's assumed to be correct. And water can actually turn anhydrous cobalt 2 chloride from blue to pink. And it turns anhydrous copper 2 sulfate from white to blue. So the only correct answers here are 2 and 4. Question 32. Which statements about the treatment of domestic water supplies are correct? So in domestic water supply, the treatment has a three-step process. Number one is sedimentation and filtration to remove not dissolved solids but insoluble solids. Then it's treated with carbon to remove any odor or taste, right? So in a way, it does help to improve the taste. And it's chlorinated to kill microbes. So the answer here is 2 and 3. 33. An experiment to find the percentage of oxygen in 150 cubic centimeter of polluted air is shown here. The apparatus is left for 1 week. After this time, the volume of gas in the measuring cylinder is 122 cubic centimeters. What is the percentage of oxygen to the nearest whole number in the polluted air? Now, iron will absorb oxygen from the polluted air to form, well, oxidized iron. So it's given that originally it's 150 cubic centimeters. Now, after the experiment, it seems like the water level now rises, which is left over with 122 cubic centimeters of air. So this shows us that this component is oxygen. So you have to minus these, you have to find the difference between these two values to find the oxygen used, which equates to 28 cubic centimeters, and compare that to the original amount of air, which is 150, and you use this value to multiply by 100%, you should get a 19% oxygen that is used here. So the answer is A. 34. Nitrogen monoxide and carbon monoxide are both removed from the exhaust gases of a car by a catalytic converter. Which statement describes how nitrogen monoxide and carbon monoxide are removed by a catalytic converter? Now, when these two gases react, they are both turned into slightly harmful gases, slightly less harmful gases, because these two gases are capable of causing environmental damage. So, for example, these two gases react together to form nitrogen gas and carbon dioxide gas. Now, so we can see from here, carbon monoxide is acting as a reducing agent. It's capable to reduce nitrogen monoxide to form nitrogen gas. So this nitrogen monoxide is actually getting reduced, and our carbon monoxide is getting oxidized here. So D for donkey. Next, 35. Propane 1O is oxidized by acidified potassium manganese 7 in a similar way to ethanol. Which compound is produced by the oxidation of propane 1O with acidified aqueous potassium manganese 7? When alcohols are oxidized for Ig level, we learn that alcohol, when they get oxidized, they form carboxylic acids. So your propane 1O will basically turn into propanoic acid. Propanoic acid. So the answer here is D for donkey, because A is a ethanol, B is a propane 1O, C is ethanoic acid. So the answer is D for donkey. Question 36. The structural formula of methylpropane is as follows. The equation represents the reaction of methylpropane with chlorine. How many structural isomers with the molecular formula C4H9 Cl can be formed from this reaction? Okay, so first let's just try to draw a butane. So butane is an alkane, which means it's saturated. All carbon-carbon bonds are single, and it has 10 hydrogen atoms. Now, during this reaction, which is substitution, if we substitute the hydrogen atoms, now there are a few possibilities where it can substitute carbon number 1, it can substitute carbon number 2. Now, if we substitute carbon, quote-unquote, carbon number 3, but actually you notice that if you count from the left, there will still be carbon number 2. So the only two possible structural isomers are butane, one chlorobutane and 2 chlorobutane. Right, 1 chlorobutane and 2 chlorobutane. So B is the answer. 37. Which statements describe disadvantage of manufacturing ethanol by fermentation? So one is actually a benefit. We use glucose to manufacture ethanol by fermentation. And 2, it does produce impure ethanol because the yeast used will produce tons of waste products, and it's impure. So there is a disadvantage. And 3, the process requires a high temperature, which is wrong. It is carried out at 25 to 35 degrees Celsius. So the answer is 2 and 4. The reaction is slower than your catalytic addition of steam to ethanol, to ethene molecules. 38. Nylon is made in a polymerization reaction. Which row describes the type of polymerization and identifies the other product of the reaction? So nylon is actually a polyamide. Polyamides are created, right? Are created using condensation reaction, which forms a water as a product. Because the meaning of condensation is that remove a small molecule to form covalent bonds between monomers, right? So addition reactions are for unsaturated substances like alkenes. So the answer here is C, right? So let's move on to question 39. Which ion forms a green precipitate with aqueous sodium hydroxide and dissolves in excess of sodium hydroxide? So when these hydroxide ions are liberated by sodium hydroxide, it can react with these metal cations to form an insoluble metal hydroxide precipitate. Now, however, calcium hydroxide is white. Copper 2 hydroxide is blue. Our only possible answers are iron 2 hydroxide and chromium 3 hydroxide. However, the answer is B for boy because chromium 3 hydroxide is able to dissolve in excess sodium hydroxide, not for iron 2 hydroxide. Next, a mixture of soluble substances can be separated by paper chromatography. Each substance can be identified using its RF value. Which formula shows how the RF value is calculated? So RF value is simply the ratio of distance traveled by the solute over distance traveled by the solvent in a chromatogram paper, right? Actually, it's a straightforward question. So like the sample, it has separation of solutes, and then we just take the distance traveled by the solute over distance traveled by the solvent. And that will be our RF value. Right, that's it for this discussion. If you're struggling in IGCSE chemistry, you can visit our website where we actually provide IGCSE chemistry tutoring and also recorded modules to help you improve in the subject. So if whether you're struggling in topical exams or whether you're struggling in the whole exam, we have exam-based preparation classes, right? Either for topical and also for full papers. So if you're struggling, we will be happy to help you. So just click the link below and then just consult us further. All right. So please like and subscribe if you like the channel. And if you need help, you can always visit our website and then ask for classes. Right. So I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.